I've always been comfortable being alone. In fact, there were many times when I craved it, preferring the company of books and music over people. So when my parents announced they were going for a weekend getaway, leaving me alone in our old countryside house, I was genuinely excited. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the trees surrounding our house were stripped of most of their leaves, revealing skeletal branches that seemed to scratch the twilight sky. I made myself some hot chocolate, curled up on the couch with a blanket, and began reading a book. Around 9 p.m., I started hearing noises. It wasn't the usual creaks and groans of an old house settling. It was the soft but persistent sound of footsteps. I figured it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I resumed my reading, trying to ignore the unease that had crept into the back of my mind. About half an hour later, the landline phone rang. The shrill sound in the silence of the house startled me. I wasn't expecting any calls, as most of my friends and family use my cell phone number. Hesitantly, I picked it up. "Hello?" My voice wavered slightly. There was no immediate answer, just soft breathing. "Hello?" I repeated, my anxiety mounting. The breath on the other end grew louder, almost like a sigh, but there were no words. I was about to hang up when a whisper crackled through. "You're not alone." I slammed the phone down, heart pounding. I tried rationalizing it, thinking it might be a prank call, yet the eeriness of it wouldn't let me shake off the fear. After a few deep breaths, I decided to lock all the doors and windows just to be safe. As I moved through the house, double-checking each lock, I had the creeping sensation of being watched. Every shadow seemed menacing, every reflection a potential threat. By the time I got back to the living room, my nerves were frayed. The phone rang again. I hesitated, staring at it as if it were a venomous snake. With a deep breath, I answered. "Who is this?" The same heavy breathing filled my ears, followed by the chilling whisper. "Don't lock me out." Panicking, I threw the phone down and ran to my room, locking the door behind me. I quickly grabbed my cell phone and dialed the local police. They told me they'd dispatch a car right away and advised me to stay on the line. As I waited, trying to explain my situation to the operator, I heard the unmistakable sound of glass shattering downstairs. Someone was inside the house. I whispered my situation to the operator, who urged me to find a hiding spot. I crawled under my bed, trying to control my breathing. Every second felt like an hour as I listened intently, praying that the intruder wouldn't come upstairs. The soft footfalls grew louder, echoing in the stillness of the house. I clutched my phone tightly, dreading the thought of being discovered. Suddenly, the footfalls paused right outside my bedroom door. My heart raced, every beat echoing in my ears. The doorknob turned slowly, but the lock held. A frustrated growl echoed through the door, followed by a chilling whisper. "I know you're in there." Tears streamed down my face as I fought to stay silent. The intruder banged against the door, each thud jolting me. But then, in the distance, I heard the comforting sound of sirens. The pounding ceased. The intruder seemed to realize the police were on their way. I heard him flee, moving rapidly down the stairs and out the broken window. When the police arrived, they scoured the premises but found no one. The broken window was the only evidence of an intruder. They took my statement and assured me they'd patrol the area. My parents cut their trip short and rushed home. We later installed a security system and always made sure someone was home when I was. But the trauma of that night lingered, making me jump at the slightest sounds. Weeks turned into months, and the incident began to fade from my memory. Then, one evening as I was settling into bed, my cell phone buzzed with a message. I picked it up, and a chill ran down my spine. It read, "Next time you won't be so lucky." The number was blocked, and despite my attempts and those of the police, the sender remained a mystery. From that day on, I was never truly alone, haunted by the thought of the stranger and his ominous promise. I've always loved the charm of old houses, the quirks, the creaks, the history they held within their walls. When I was 22, I rented an ancient home on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of house you'd expect to see in a period drama, with Victorian architecture and sprawling rooms. I was drawn to it immediately, despite the warnings that the place might be more of a hassle due to its age. For the first couple of months, things were relatively uneventful. Sure, the house had its quirks, doors that wouldn't stay shut and floorboards that squealed with every step, but nothing too out of the ordinary. However, it was during a particularly cold November evening when I was left alone in the house for the first time. My roommate had gone to visit family, that things took a terrifying turn. I was lounging in the living room, engrossed in a book, when I heard a soft, rhythmic thumping sound. It seemed to be coming from above. My first thought was that it might be a tree branch brushing against the roof, but a glance outside confirmed that there was no tree close enough to the house. I tried to brush it off and return to my book, but the thumping persisted, growing louder and more insistent. It sounded deliberate, almost like footsteps. I mustered up enough courage to investigate. The thumping seemed to be originating from the attic. Our attic was more of a storage space, a dark, dusty room filled with discarded boxes and old furniture. Neither my roommate nor I ventured up there often. I hesitated at the foot of the attic stairs, the weight of the silence pressing down on me. The only sound was my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Taking a deep breath, I began to ascend. With each step, the thumping grew louder. When I reached the top, I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob, the cold metal biting into my palm. I pushed the door open. The dim light from the hallway illuminated a narrow portion of the attic. There was no one there. But what caught my eye in the center of the room was an old wooden rocking chair. It was swaying back and forth, its motion perfectly in sync with the thumping I'd heard. I was frozen in place, watching the chair rock with no apparent force moving it. My rational mind tried to chalk it up to wind or some other logical explanation, but the windows were shut tight. There was no draft. Suddenly, the chair stopped rocking as if someone had grabbed it. The temperature in the attic seemed to drop several degrees. Then, a voice, cold and raspy, whispered my name. Alex. I turned and fled, not looking back, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I bolted out of the house, my breath visible in the chilly air. I called the police from a neighbor's house, too afraid to go back inside. When the police arrived, they searched the house thoroughly, but found no signs of forced entry. The attic, when they checked, was as still and undisturbed as it always was. The rocking chair sat silently in its place, showing no signs of the eerie movement I'd witnessed. I explained the situation, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They advised me to stay with someone for the night, and I gladly complied, crashing at a friend's place. The next day, still shaken, I did some research on the house. I learned that, over a century ago, it belonged to a woman named Clara. Clara had lost her young child and had reportedly gone mad with grief, spending hours in the attic, sitting in a rocking chair, murmuring to herself. Neighbors claimed they often heard her talking to someone, even though she lived alone after her child's death. It was said that she passed away in that very attic, still waiting for her child to come back to her. The pieces fell into place in my mind. The rocking chair, the voice, the coldness. Was Clara's spirit still trapped in that house, forever mourning her lost child? I moved out shortly after. I couldn't bear the thought of another night there, knowing the history of the place. The house was eventually put back on the market, but I noticed it remained vacant for a long time. Every so often I drive past the old house. Sometimes when the world is quiet and the wind whispers through the trees, I swear I can hear the soft thumping of a rocking chair from the attic, and Clara's voice, forever calling out for her lost child. It was one of those nights where the dense fog seemed to consume everything, making the streets outside my window appear as if they disappeared into oblivion. Living on the outskirts of a small town had its quiet charms, but that particular night was too quiet. A silence that was almost suffocating. I was used to being home alone. My parents frequently traveled for work, leaving me to look after the old Victorian house that had been in our family for generations. I'd always taken pride in my independence, but that night the vast echoing room seemed daunting. The evening started like any other. I was settled in the living room, engrossed in a movie, when my phone buzzed with a message notification. The preview on the lock screen showed an unknown number and read, "Looks like you're enjoying your movie." Confused, I unlocked the phone and replied, "Who is this?" I waited a few minutes, but there was no response. Thinking it was a wrong number or a misguided prank, I dismissed it. I resumed my movie, but I couldn't shake off an eerie feeling. Every creak of the house, every play of shadows seemed amplified. My nerves were on edge. Another buzz from my phone broke my reverie. It was another message from the unknown number. "Why did you shut the curtains?" Panic surged through me. I hadn't remembered closing the living room curtains, but sure enough, they were drawn shut. I hurriedly locked all the doors and in a brief moment of courage texted back, "If this is a joke, it's not funny." The reply was almost instantaneous. Who said I was joking? I decided to call the police. While I waited for them, another message came through, this one more menacing than the last. Why call the police? We just want to play. Terrified, I moved to the kitchen, grabbing a knife for protection. The fog outside seemed to press against the windows, and I could barely see the front yard. Suddenly, a shadow moved, then another and another. Masked figures were slowly emerging from the fog, inching closer to the house. I called the police again, urging them to hurry. The dispatcher's voice was my only tether to sanity, reassuring me that officers were en route. But time seemed to stretch interminably. The masked figures reached the windows, their breath fogging the glass as they peered inside. Their masks were grotesque, caricatures of twisted faces that seemed to mock my fear. They began to circle the house, tapping on the windows, their chilling laughter filling the night. I could hear them whispering to each other, trying to find a way in. Every locked door and window was a small barrier, a temporary reprieve. I barricaded myself in the upstairs bedroom, praying that the police would arrive soon. Then the whispering stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. The sudden quiet was even more terrifying. Moments later, a crash echoed through the house. They had broken in. I could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving up the staircase. My heart raced, and every second felt like an eternity. They were getting closer. I gripped the knife tightly, preparing for a confrontation. Suddenly, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The footsteps paused, then retreated hastily. I held my breath, listening as the intruders scrambled, their escape hastened by the approaching police. When the officers arrived, they found the back door broken, but the intruders had vanished, melting away into the fog from which they emerged. The police conducted a thorough investigation, but the masked harassers were never found. They had left behind only their chilling messages and a house forever tainted by fear. The events of that night haunt me still. I moved out of the old Victorian home shortly after, unable to bear the weight of the memories. But the most chilling part of it all came weeks later, in a letter with no return address. Inside was a single haunting message. Next time there won't be any police to save you.